The sound of a shattering plate echoed through the small cabin as Prudence Sutton flinched, her trembling hands hovering over the mess of ceramic and stew now splattered across the wooden floor. Her husband Vernon's shadow loomed over her, his face contorted with the familiar rage that had become the hallmark of their 5-year marriage. "Clean it up," he spat, kicking a broken shard toward her before stumbling out the door, likely headed to the saloon where he'd spend what little money they had left. Prudence was 24, though the lines around her eyes and the perpetual tension in her shoulders made her appear much older. As she carefully gathered the broken pieces, she caught her reflection in a small mirror hanging crooked on the wall. The purple shadow beneath her left eye was fading to a sickly yellow, but a fresh bruise was forming on her cheekbone where Vernon had struck her when she'd asked if he might help with the garden that morning. It was 1878, and Prudence had been living in Dry Creek, Arizona territory for 3 years now, ever since Vernon had moved them from Missouri with promises of prosperity and a fresh start. Those promises had withered faster than corn in a drought. As the door slammed behind Vernon, Prudence's shoulders relaxed slightly. She had perhaps 3 hours before he returned, drunk and dangerous. She looked around the small cabin that had never become a home, just a place where pain lived. Something inside her shifted, like a rock finally dislodging after years of being wedged in place. Tonight would be different. Tonight had to be different. With quick, decisive movements, Prudence gathered what few possessions truly belonged to her, a brush her mother had given her, a small pouch containing her grandmother's wedding ring, a faded photograph of her parents, and the little money she'd managed to hide beneath a loose floorboard. She wrapped everything in her one good dress and secured it with string, then changed into her sturdy boots and the plain brown dress she wore for working in the garden. Her heart pounded as she reached for Vernon's shotgun. She'd never fired it, but she knew how it worked. She didn't plan to use it, but the roads weren't safe for a woman alone. After loading it and tucking extra shells into her pocket, she paused at the small cabinet and took enough food to last a few days. Prudence didn't leave a note. There was nothing left to say. The night air felt cool against her face as she stepped outside. The stars spread like spilled sugar across the vast Arizona sky. Prudence had heard rumors of a town called Copper Springs about 30 miles west. It wasn't much, but it was far enough that Vernon wouldn't easily find her, and she'd heard they had a dressmaker who might need help. She set off walking along the narrow trail that led west, staying off the main road. The weight of her bundle and the shotgun grew heavier with each step, but the farther she got from that cabin, the lighter her heart felt. For the first time in years, she was moving toward something rather than cowering away from something. By dawn, she'd covered nearly 10 miles, her feet blistered and her muscles aching. She found a small grove of cottonwoods near a creek and decided to rest during the hottest part of the day. As she soaked her feet in the cool water, Prudence allowed herself to think about what freedom might mean. No more walking on eggshells, no more explanations to the doctor about her clumsiness, no more muffling her cries into a pillow. She must have dozed off because the sound of approaching horses startled her awake. Grabbing the shotgun, she crouched behind a large rock, heart hammering in her chest. Had Vernon found her already, 2 riders appeared, neither of them her husband. One was an older man with a silver-streaked beard, and the other a younger man whose face was shadowed by his hat. They dismounted near the creek, apparently planning to water their horses. "Sure is hot today," the older man said, removing his hat to wipe sweat from his brow. "Reckon we'll make it to Copper Springs by nightfall if we push on after the horses rest." Copper Springs exactly where she was headed. Prudence hesitated, then decided to reveal herself. If she could travel with them, she'd be safer and would arrive sooner. She stepped out cautiously, keeping the shotgun visible but not aimed at them. "Excuse me, gentlemen." Both men turned sharply, hands instinctively moving toward their sidearms before relaxing slightly at the sight of a woman. "Madam," the older man nodded, though his eyes remained wary, "you gave us quite a start." "I apologize," Prudence said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I couldn't help overhearing you're headed to Copper Springs. I'm traveling there myself and wondered if I might accompany you." The younger man finally raised his head, and Prudence found herself looking into the most startlingly blue eyes she'd ever seen, set in a sun-bronzed face. He studied her with a careful gaze that seemed to take in everything: her worn dress, the shotgun, and most noticeably, the bruise on her face she couldn't hide. "I'm Jacob Vaughn," he said finally, his voice low and measured. "This is my uncle, Frank Thorpe. We're cattle hands heading back from a delivery." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "It's not safe for a lady to be traveling alone." Prudence lifted her chin slightly. "Sometimes being alone is safer than the alternative, Mr. Vaughn." Something flickered in Jacob's eyes, understanding, perhaps, or recognition. He exchanged a glance with his uncle, who gave a slight nod. "We'd be happy for the company, miss." Frank trailed off questioningly. "Sutton. Prudence Sutton," she replied, then added quickly, "I'm a widow." The lie came easily: necessary protection. "Well, Mrs. Sutton, you're welcome to ride with us," Jacob said. "My horse, Renegade, is strong enough to carry two." Within minutes, they had helped Prudence onto Jacob's horse, and he mounted behind her, careful to maintain a respectful distance while still ensuring she wouldn't fall. The proximity to a man made her tense initially, but as they rode and Jacob made no move to touch her beyond what was necessary, she gradually relaxed. They traveled in comfortable silence for a while before Frank began sharing stories about their cattle drive, his voice carrying over the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats. Prudence found herself smiling at his animated descriptions, a feeling so foreign it almost hurt her face. "What takes you to Copper Springs, Mrs. Sutton?" Jacob asked eventually, his voice close to her ear but not intrusive. "A fresh start," she replied simply. "I heard there might be work with the dressmaker there." "Miss Harriet," Frank confirmed. "Good woman. Lost her assistant to marriage last month, so your timing's fortunate." As the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Prudence found herself studying Jacob's hands on the reins. They were strong, calloused from work, yet he handled the horse with gentle confidence. They were nothing like Vernon's hands, which had only ever brought her pain. "We should make camp soon," Frank called back. "There's a good spot about a mile ahead with a natural spring." They set up camp efficiently, with Jacob building a small fire while Frank tended to the horses. Prudence insisted on preparing the meal from their combined provisions, grateful to contribute something. As they ate beans and jerky around the campfire, Frank regaled them with tales of his younger days driving cattle up to Montana. Prudence found herself laughing at his colorful descriptions, the sound rusty and unfamiliar in her throat. When it was time to sleep, Jacob offered her his bedroll and insisted on taking first watch. "You need the rest more than I do, Mrs. Sutton," he said, his eyes briefly lingering on her bruised cheek before politely looking away. As Prudence settled into the bedroll, wrapped in a blanket that smelled of leather and clean sweat, she watched Jacob staring into the fire, his profile strong against the night sky. For the first time in years, she fell asleep without fear. Morning came with dew on the desert plants and birds calling to one another. Prudence woke feeling more rested than she had in years, despite sleeping on the ground. She found Jacob already awake, brewing coffee over a small fire. "Good morning," he said, offering her a tin cup. "Hope you slept well." "Better than I have in a long time," she admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and Prudence was surprised to find she didn't flinch. Frank joined them shortly, and after a quick breakfast, they continued their journey. By mid-afternoon, the buildings of Copper Springs came into view, modest but well-kept structures nestled in a valley with the mountains rising behind them. "Not much to look at compared to bigger towns," Frank said, "but it's a good place, decent folk." As they rode down the main street, Prudence took in the sights: a general store, a saloon, a small church, and various businesses, including a storefront with mannequins wearing dresses in the window. Miss Harriet's shop, she presumed. They stopped in front of a 2-story building with a sign reading Thorpe Boarding House. "My sister runs this place," Frank explained. "Best beds in town and fair prices. She'll treat you right." Jacob dismounted first, then offered his hand to help Prudence down. She hesitated only briefly before accepting, finding his touch steady and undemanding. "Thank you both for your kindness," she said, looking between the two men who had escorted her safely to her new beginning. "It was our pleasure, Mrs. Sutton," Frank replied with a small bow before excusing himself to see to the horses. Jacob lingered, seeming to wrestle with something he wanted to say. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet enough that only she could hear. "Whoever he was, the man who hurt you. You're safe from him now, and if I ever have anything to say about it, you'll never be hurt again." Their eyes met, and in that moment, Prudence felt something stir inside her that she'd thought Vernon had killed long ago. Hope. Over the next weeks, Prudence settled into life in Copper Springs. Martha Thorpe, Frank's sister, had taken an immediate liking to her and offered her a small room at a reduced rate in exchange for help around the boarding house. Miss Harriet had indeed needed assistance in her dress shop and was delighted by Prudence's fine stitching, hiring her part-time. Jacob and Frank had ridden out to the ranch where they worked the day after arriving in town, but Jacob made a point of stopping by whenever he came into town for supplies. His visits were brief and respectful, sometimes just a tip of his hat as he passed the dress shop. Other times a few minutes of conversation on the boarding house porch. Each time she saw him, Prudence felt that same flutter of hope, though she tamped it down quickly. She wasn't ready for anything more than friendship. Wasn't sure she ever would be. On a crisp October afternoon, Prudence was sweeping the boarding house porch when Jacob rode up, his horses' hooves clattering on the packed dirt of the street. He dismounted in one fluid motion, removing his hat as he approached. "Afternoon, Mrs. Sutton," he greeted, his smile warming his eyes. "Beautiful day." "It is indeed, Mr. Vaughn," she replied, noticing how the sunlight caught in his dark hair, bringing out hints of auburn. "What brings you to town today?" "Ranch business mostly, but I was hoping to speak with you as well, if you have a moment." Prudence set aside her broom and gestured to the chairs on the porch. "I was about to take a break anyway." They sat, and Jacob seemed uncharacteristically nervous, turning his hat in his hands. "There's a social at the church this Saturday evening," he finally said. "Music, dancing, good food. I was wondering if you might allow me to escort you." The invitation shouldn't have surprised her, yet it did. She'd seen the way Jacob looked at her when he thought she wasn't noticing, had felt the careful growing of something between them. But the thought of being someone's companion again, even in this innocent way, made her heart race with both excitement and fear. Jacob must have read the conflict on her face. Just as friends, Mrs. Sutton, no expectations beyond enjoying an evening of community celebration. Prudence took a deep breath. "I'd like that, Mr. Vaughn, thank you." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "I'll call for you at 6, then." As he walked back to his horse, Prudence found herself watching the confident set of his shoulders, so different from Vernon's perpetual aggressive slouch. Jacob never made her feel small or afraid, he made her feel seen. Saturday arrived with Prudence in a state of nervous anticipation. Martha insisted on helping her prepare, lending her a blue dress that brought out the amber flecks in her hazel eyes and arranging her honey-brown hair in a style that framed her face beautifully. "You look lovely, dear," Martha said, standing back to admire her work. "And that Jacob Vaughn is a good man. His father was my husband's best friend before both passed. Jacob was raised right." When Jacob arrived, his appreciative gaze made Prudence blush for the first time in years. He offered his arm with a slight bow, and together they walked the short distance to the church, where lanterns had been strung across the yard and tables laden with food lined one side. The evening was everything Prudence hadn't known she needed, simple pleasures long denied her. She tasted Mrs. Johnson's famous apple pie, clapped along to fiddle music, and even allowed Jacob to lead her in a gentle waltz, his hand respectfully at her waist, maintaining perfect distance. "You dance beautifully," he said as they moved around the floor. "My father taught me when I was young," she replied, surprised at how easily the memory came, untainted by the darker ones that usually overwhelmed it. "He said every lady should know how to waltz." He was right, Jacob smiled. "Though I'm grateful my uncle insisted I learn too, or I'd be stepping all over your toes right now." As the evening wound down, they walked back to the boarding house beneath a canopy of stars. Jacob had draped his coat over her shoulders when he noticed her shiver, and the weight of it felt protective rather than constraining. At the porch steps, they paused. "Thank you for a wonderful evening," Prudence said softly. "I can't remember the last time I enjoyed myself so much." Jacob's eyes were serious as he looked at her. "You deserve joy, Prudence, more than anyone I know." The use of her first name, spoken with such gentle reverence, brought tears to her eyes. She blinked them away quickly. "Good night, Jacob." "Good night," he replied. Waiting until she was safely inside before turning to leave from her window, Prudence watched him walk away, his tall figure silhouetted against the moonlit street. For the first time, she allowed herself to acknowledge the truth: she was falling in love with Jacob Vaughn. And it terrified her. The weeks passed, and autumn gave way to winter. Jacob's visits to town became more frequent, and their friendship deepened. He never pressed for more than she was ready to give, content with conversations on the porch, occasional shared meals at the town's small restaurant, or walks through the peaceful streets of Copper Springs. During one such walk in early December, snow began to fall, delicate flakes drifting down to melt against their coats. Prudence tilted her face upward, catching snowflakes on her eyelashes and laughing with simple delight. "You're beautiful when you laugh," Jacob said, his voice husky. "I wish I could make you laugh every day." The honesty in his words made her pause. They had reached the small bridge over the creek that ran through town, and Prudence turned to face him, gathering her courage. "Jacob, I need to tell you something." She took a deep breath, the cold air sharp in her lungs. "I'm not really a widow." His expression remained steady, open. "I know," surprise flickered across her face. "You know, I suspected from the beginning," he admitted. "The way you flinched at sudden movements, how you watched doorways. I've seen it before, with my cousin's wife before she finally left her husband." Prudence leaned against the bridge railing, snow gathering on her shoulders. "His name is Vernon. We were married for 5 years, and for 5 years She couldn't finish. "You don't have to explain," Jacob said gently. "You got away, that's what matters. But I lied to you, to everyone here. I'm still legally married to a man who would drag me back if he found me." She looked down at her gloved hands, twisting them together. "I'm not free to consider a future with anyone else." Jacob moved closer, not touching her but near enough that she could feel his warmth. "There are lawyers who handle such matters. Marriages can be dissolved, especially in cases of cruelty." Hope fluttered in her chest, fragile as the snowflakes falling around them. "Even if that were possible, I'm not sure I could ever be what a man wants in a wife again. I'm broken, Jacob." "No," he said firmly, finally reaching out to gently lift her chin until their eyes met. "Hurt, yes. Cautious, understandably. But not broken. Never that." In his eyes, Prudence saw something she'd been searching for her entire life, a reflection of herself as whole, valuable, worthy of gentleness. Before she could respond, the church bell rang, signaling the hour. "It's getting late," Jacob said, dropping his hand. "We should get you back before this snow gets worse." They walked back to the boarding house in thoughtful silence, the snow crunching beneath their boots. At the door, Jacob tipped his hat. "Think about what I said, Prudence, about the lawyer. Whatever you decide, I'll respect it." She nodded, watching him leave with a heart full of conflicting emotions. That night, Prudence wrote a letter to a lawyer in Tucson whose name Martha had provided, inquiring about the possibility of divorcing Vernon on grounds of cruelty. Just writing the words down describing the years of abuse in clinical, legal terms was both painful and strangely liberating. 2 weeks later, she received a response. The lawyer believed she had grounds for divorce and could proceed with minimal risk of Vernon being able to contest it successfully, especially if she could provide witness statements about her injuries. She shared the news with Jacob on Christmas Eve as they sat by the fire in the boarding house parlor after most of the other residents had retired. "He thinks it's possible," she said quietly, watching the flames dance. "If Martha and the doctor in Dry Creek who treated me will provide statements, I might be free by spring." Jacob's face lit up with carefully contained hope. "That's wonderful news, Prudence." "It's terrifying," she admitted, "but also, I feel like I can breathe again." "Whatever happens," Jacob said, reaching over to gently cover her hand with his, "you don't have to face it alone unless you want to." His touch was warm, solid an anchor rather than a chain. Prudence turned her hand beneath his so their palms met, fingers intertwining. It was the first time she had initiated such contact, and the significance wasn't lost on either of them. "Merry Christmas, Jacob," she whispered. "Merry Christmas, Prudence," he replied, his smile warming her more thoroughly than the fire. Winter passed with agonizing slowness. The divorce proceedings were set in motion, with Martha providing a statement about Prudence's condition when she'd arrived in Copper Springs, and the doctor from Dry Creek sending a damning letter detailing 3 years of treating injuries he'd always suspected were not accidental. Jacob supported her through every step, sometimes just by being a steady presence when the fear threatened to overwhelm her. He never pushed for declarations or commitments, seemingly content to be whatever she needed him to be. In early April, as the desert bloomed with unexpected color, Prudence received official notification that her marriage to Vernon Sutton had been dissolved. She was legally free. That evening, she walked to the small ranch just outside town where Jacob had recently purchased land and built a modest but sturdy house. He'd invited her to see it when it was completed, though she hadn't yet found the courage to visit. She found him mending a fence, his sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms bronzed by the sun. He looked up as she approached, shielding his eyes against the late afternoon light. "Prudence," he greeted her, setting down his tools. "This is a pleasant surprise." She held out the official paper, her hand trembling slightly. "It came today. The divorce is final." Joy bloomed across his face, but he tempered it quickly. "How do you feel?" "Free," she said simply. "Scared, hopeful." She looked around at the small ranch, taking in the neat house, the corrals, the small garden plot ready for planting. "You've made a beautiful home here." "It's still missing something important," he said quietly. Prudence's heart quickened. "What's that?" Instead of answering, Jacob took a step closer. "Prudence, I've known since that first day by the creek that you were someone special, watching you rebuild your life, seeing your strength and kindness. I've fallen in love with you." Tears filled her eyes, but they weren't tears of fear or sadness. "Jacob, I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give," he continued. "If friendship is all you ever want from me, I'll be grateful for that. But I wanted you to know that my heart is yours, whether or not you choose to take it." Prudence closed the distance between them, reaching up to touch his face with a steady hand. "I never thought I could trust again or love, but you've shown me I was wrong." Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, Jacob lowered his head until their lips met in a kiss so gentle, it made her previous experiences seem like they'd happened to someone else entirely. His hands remained at his sides, letting her control the moment completely. When they parted, Prudence rested her forehead against his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and true beneath her touch. "I love you too, Jacob. I think I have for a long time, but I was afraid to admit it even to myself." He wrapped his arms around her carefully, holding her as if she were made of precious glass. "We have all the time in the world, Prudence. There's no rush." But she shook her head, looking up at him with newfound certainty. "I've spent too many years living in fear, waiting for the next painful moment. I don't want to waste another day not fully living." 6 weeks later, on a perfect May morning, Prudence stood beside Jacob in the small church of Copper Springs, exchanging vows before the town that had become her true home. She wore a dress she'd made herself in Miss Harriet's shop, simple but elegant, with tiny pearl buttons she'd saved up to purchase. Martha had arranged wildflowers in her hair, and Frank stood proudly as Jacob's best man. Even Miss Harriet had closed her shop for the day to attend, dabbing at her eyes throughout the ceremony. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Jacob's kiss was still gentle but held a promise of passion carefully banked, waiting for her to be ready. The celebration afterward was joyous, with music and dancing continuing well into the evening. As the sun began to set, casting long golden rays across the town, Jacob and Prudence slipped away to begin their new life together at the ranch. Standing on the porch of what was now their home, Jacob swept her into his arms to carry her across the threshold, making her laugh with delight. "Welcome home, Mrs. Vaughn," he said, setting her gently on her feet in the front room decorated with wildflowers and new curtains Martha had helped her sew. Home, Prudence repeated, the word filling her with warmth. I think I've been searching for home my entire life. You'll never have to search again, Jacob promised, drawing her close. And you'll never be hurt again, not while I have breath in my body. As twilight deepened into night, Prudence discovered that love could heal even the deepest wounds. Jacob's tenderness showed her that physical intimacy could be beautiful rather than something to endure or fear. For the first time, she felt her body was truly her own, a source of joy rather than pain. The years that followed brought challenges, as all lives do, but they faced them together. They worked side by side to build their ranch into a thriving business, adding cattle and horses until the Vaughn brand was respected throughout the territory. In their third year of marriage, they welcomed a daughter they named Hope, followed 2 years later by a son they called Benjamin, after Jacob's father. Prudence found that motherhood healed another piece of her heart, allowing her to create the loving family she'd always dreamed of. Sometimes, in the quiet moments while watching Jacob teach Benjamin to ride or braid Hope's hair with surprising gentleness, Prudence would remember the woman who had fled in the night with nothing but a shotgun and a small bundle of possessions. That woman would never have believed this life was possible. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jacob surprised her with a locket containing miniature portraits of their children. As he fastened it around her neck, his fingers brushed the nape of her neck, causing the same pleasant shiver they always had. "Happy anniversary, my love," he whispered, pressing a kiss to her temple. 10 years, Prudence marveled, leaning back against his chest as they stood on their porch watching the sunset paint the desert in fire. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I found you by that creek. Best day of my life," Jacob said simply, "though every day since has been a close second." Prudence turned in his arms, studying the face she loved. A few more lines around his eyes now, a touch of silver at his temples, but still the same steady gaze that had first given her courage. "Thank you for showing me what love really is, Jacob Vaughn." "Thank you for being brave enough to accept it," he replied, drawing her close as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. In that moment, with the sounds of their children's laughter drifting from inside the house and the solid warmth of Jacob's embrace, Prudence knew with absolute certainty that the long journey from fear to love had been worth every step. The woman who had walked away from years of bruises had found not just safety, but joy. The cowboy who had promised she would never be hurt again had kept his word, healing her heart with patience and unwavering devotion. Together, they had built something neither had dared to dream possible, a love strong enough to overcome the past and illuminate the future, as constant and bright as the stars above the Arizona desert.